All right, so let's begin our meeting. And I know that I was unable to. There was another subcommittee meeting, a joint subcommittee meeting. Am I correct, John?
Yeah, can you guys hear me all right? I'm
Yep.
at a conference and I'm just trying to stay quiet. Um,
Yep.
but
We
yeah, there
can.
was there was a joint meeting last shoot. Was it last week? No, it wouldn't have been. Um, there was a joint meeting I think maybe 2 weeks ago.
Okay, so there wasn't
No,
another
I think
one
you were no,
after.
you were at that one. Yeah. No, that
Yeah.
was you were okay.
Okay. Did we want to review anything else about that meeting?
I don't think so. And again, I think it was mostly an exercise in trying to get this committee to sort of see what some of the issues were with the nutrient regulation committee. But
Yep.
I think that those discussions are ongoing, and I think Audra's office is going to be doing sort of another presentation tomorrow afternoon. So I think it's kind of a work in progress. I don't think it necessarily needs to affect what we're up to right now.
Okay. Yeah, I know we have our full joint meeting tomorrow. I am unable to attend. I have a prior commitment from a few months back that I can not get out of. So um, it's a promise to my daughters. We're going to Hamilton in New York City, but that's been on the calendar for a long time. So um,
Do not throw away your shot.
not exactly. So and they're very much looking forward to it. So um, I guess we can pick up kind of where we left off, and I do appreciate Jim for putting pen to paper and putting some initial thoughts together. Do we want to just start with what Jim's remarks were? I think he sent them to everybody, didn't you, Jim?
Yes, I sent them to just only to our committee. I think about six people.
Yeah.
Um,
And I can share those on the screen. Can you see his? There it is. Yeah. So we can start with this as kind of a framework because we were brainstorming where we were going as our with our subcommittee. And I think we were on to a very good line and we can incorporate that into some of these comments. But this was a good place to start. Did everybody get a chance to review this? Go ahead, Matt.
Sorry, it took me a minute to find all the buttons here. Thank you, Jim, for doing that. I have one thing that maybe perhaps just a one tiny modification. It's right in the beginning. I think we still could keep water treatment, wastewater. Historically, that's what we've had. Um, and I'd be okay with that only because it is related in so much that it's a subsurface system, and we do have the knowledge base for that. And so I'm okay with that. And also just instead of calling it crematoriums, just say human remains, disposition of human remains, because it's more than that. But otherwise, Jim, thank you. This is exactly what I would be looking for. But just to be clear on just some of the topics, like I said, disposition, human remains. It's not just crematoriums. We deal with pretty much any means of body disposal. But otherwise, thank you.
yeah, after reviewing it, I jot down some notes of some flaws that I found out after sending it, and one of the flaws that was I didn't know that you wanted WTW underneath there, but we also going to have to look at um, AT. Is that going to fall under, or are you going to have a whole separate AT section that's going to have to be related to subsurface? So I don't know how that's going to be a tie-in.
For sure. I mean, I know Adam wants to talk. I'm sorry, Adam, just one real quick.
Yeah,
Realistically, I think it would be helpful if it was sort of a separate program, but we would be obviously working closely together. But Adam,
Okay.
go ahead. I'm sorry.
yeah, no apologies needed, Matt. I meant to. We hadn't talked about this beforehand, so but I was reading this and wondering if the exact breakdown belongs in the recommendations. I mean, ultimately, I think this would come down to Matt's section and leadership here on exactly how this would be broken down. And depending on any number of factors that could change. I feel like what the group is really looking for, what Matt's looking for as well, is maybe some more staff to handle all of this workload. Exactly how it's broken down, there's so many variables involved in both, even listening to Matt and Jim's conversation now, that fluctuate just within his own section or across the department. But so the exact breakdown of it, I don't know. I don't know if that's quite in our charge here. When I think what the group's mostly looking for is maybe some additional personnel to help out Matt's section on the workload. But I'm open to further discussion on that.
Go ahead, Jim.
Well, Adam, we think alike, and I don't know if that's a good thing for you to think like me. But as I wrote down flaws, and my first flaw in my writing is that I should have added more staffing to EEP. So and then my thought process to break it down is that I think we need to submit what we want to submit, and then let the higher ups make that decision. And I understand, not saying anything that maybe you have an insight in that, Adam, but if it's not broken down, we don't give them a guidance, then we're going to be, at their whim.
Yeah, I think a concern would be, looking at this without additional staffing, if this comes up as a recommendation and there's a legislative statute requiring us to break it down this way, that's just going to pull some people out of Matt's section, bring them into this new section, and we're going to have the same problem, except, spread out over, same workload spread out over two sections, with no additional personnel in there. And that wouldn't necessarily really solve the issue that you guys are looking to get at.
Well, should it be reorganization and establish additional staffing?
Additional or proper?
This is also the point where I should also probably mention that officially, until we see the governor's budget, I cannot come down officially on the side. The agency as a policy can't officially come down on a side that suggests more funding. So later on, we'll have to be abstaining on these recommendations. But so I'll let you guys figure it out from there. I'm just trying to, help parse out what I think you guys are thinking of and focusing on.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a little bit putting the cart before the horse, trying to wait for their budget to come out and then say, okay, we can agree to additional funding. Just kind of like on my comment about working from home, like I don't care that your labor agreement says you can work from home. I'm just making, I have an opinion and a recommendation that says that if your concern is continuity of knowledge and ability to train new staff, that's counterintuitive to working from home. So we can make a recommendation that says we're understaffed, from the viewpoint of this committee, not Matt or Adam, from the viewpoint of this committee, we see a staffing issue. We see that we are inadequately staffed to meet the requirements as they're listed here, and as the new bill requires you guys to perform. So like our recommendation is additional staffing. And then from there, the governor should make his budget. You know,
Right, and
that's
ideal, like the timing of this should work out, right? I mean, the governor's budget usually comes out like at near the beginning of the session. Like our recommendations are going to be in place well before that, I would hope. And yeah, we can, but I don't see any problem, Matt, that the charge of our overall committee, ideally, is to kind of buffer any political fallout from current state employees. I don't think, I think, Adam, your point is well taken, but I don't see that we will have any hesitations to recommend more staff as needed.
Yeah.
no, on the staffing thing, let's just kind of talk about it in general.
I
Like,
think,
Yeah, can
I
I?
think Matt has his hand up. Yeah.
Yeah,
oh, sorry, man.
you might. Now, I just, the whole point though, guys, is with this is the first three items that are listed for what our objective would be for this program to keep is historically what we operated at, except, we recently acquired the water treatment wastewater. In other words, those were our historical tasks, and I believe that we can continue doing that. These two new initiatives, public pools and family campgrounds, those were just thrown on us in the last couple of years when I came to this program. So that was just thrown over. The way I see it is it's not just a staffing, unless I had like 10 staff where I was just literally overseeing it. But even then, that's really a manager, because these are separate programs. That's where you have a manager come in. So it's not even a supervisor. Supervisor manages or oversees a program with a specific structure of that program. Again, wastewater. We have asbestos. We have lead. We have food. We're the only program in environmental health that has multiple sub-programs that are basically standalone programs on it. So that would be my only caution. I like how it's broken. I realize that's leadership's decision, but I think it's just to just draw attention to it. I mean, I would appreciate it. I got to be careful what I'm saying because, obviously this affects me. But again, I think that having these things separate, or at least letting them know that that's a potential direction to go in, or the ideal direction to go in my opinion, is the way to go. But just saying my 2 cents.
Yeah, I mean, that's why you're here.
Yeah. It's tough, but those. So the decision. I mean, it's difficult when you have these such varied topics. And to have to switch gears and make decisions on it, and then make educated decisions on it, is very difficult for a supervisor. And that's more of a manager's type of role, because you're making those higher level decisions for multiple programs, and that's kind of what's happening here. And it's been very taxing to me. And then other programs suffer as a result because they don't get the attention, or actually everybody suffers. It's almost like I was telling my other staff, it's like the jack of all trades, master of none. It just reminds me, this is what it feels like, where, you know a little bit of everything, but you're not able to get to the meat of the issues and a lot of these things. And so then everything suffers. Not just septics, but the pools suffer, the campgrounds suffer, the other stuff suffers. And I don't want to see that. I want everything to get the attention it needs.
Okay. Jim?
So, listen to Matt, I think we need to see some type of flow chart or a chain of, I'll use a military term, a chain of command, okay? So I'm not aware of, the structure of, you have a manager and then a supervisor and then you have workers. So I don't have a concept of that that chain in order to get a better understanding of what you're saying, Matt. I mean, so maybe if we had a list of the hierarchy in that area, then maybe we get a better sense of what Adam and you're talking about, Matt, about the reorganization if we wanted to propose it. But I think we need to propose something and hope for the best.
Yeah. What kind of staffing would you need to do this EEP mission? I always go back to my vocabulary, sorry. You're on mute, Matt.
Okay, sorry, I'm working with two screens. So I'll break it down for you. I mean, honestly, right now, if I were able to get rid of those two responsibilities, public pools and family campgrounds, my existing staff with who I have right now, we could do this. Now, I'm not talking AT though. That's just with what we have right now. We could focus on it. We could get into the weeds. We would have the time to get into all of these changes that are needed because these things haven't been touched since '82. And we could do it comfortably where we're not going to be making mistakes and rushing through things. So I would say what we have right now actually could get it to work. I mean, and I even see in my mind's eye, I can see how it will happen with the AT. What my envision was to have a second supervisor with that, with two other engineers. And then the two engineers would basically work together, and there'd be some overlap because I have environmental analyst staff. I have a couple of analysts, and what they do is they do a lot of the like training and different things like that. And there's a lot of overlap, and in this case, maybe possibly enforcement. And they can overlap with our programs. They could almost share, so we could share resources and things like that. I know I'm getting way ahead of myself here, but if we're just talking the immediate right now, this legislative proposal, this change, if right now we had gotten, I mean, bare bones, I'm going to say, but if we had gotten rid of those responsibilities, just because they constitute more than 30% of our workload right now, that would be a tremendous help for us to focus on this.
So refocusing a little, Matt, though, how many staff do you think would need to run the public pools and family campgrounds then? Because if we're breaking it, as this is currently written, that would be broken in a new section, and that would need staff to function in those sections. Because without new staff, people are just getting pulled out of your section under this, and then you have the same problem.
You got it, Adam. I mean, and there was actually another position, engineer position that we had that the guy walked off, and then of course got dissolved. So we had that position. So I've already told leadership to take that position, and what they should do, and I'll get into the weeds here if you're okay with it, Adam, is historically this it was called the recreation program. It was headed by one person, obviously a very competent person, but at any rate, it was under the private well program, which basically consisted of one supervisor and then one staff. That program has since moved over to drinking water, but still maintains a supervisor. And why I think it's a good fit is because the treatment systems for pools are almost identical to treatment systems for small water systems, like the filtration systems and everything else and the pumps and all that. So they could actually, if that was moved over there, we could take that one position that I used to have here to fund a full-time person. There's a person in drinking water that we had on loan for a while. This guy is a rock star. I mean, he could have done this all by himself under a supervisor, but unfortunately he was pulled back. But anyway, they could use him to help train this new person, as well as us. We could offer that as well. But that one full-time person under a supervisor, as long as that person's competent and potentially has some resources from drinking water now and again, I think it can be done. It doesn't need, 3 or 4 people to do it. If you have one competent person under a supervisor that can donate their time, and then with a little bit of assistance from potential drinking water staff, I think they could do it.
And is this person an engineer?
It would be an engineer, yes.
I'm just making notes. We'll all have a chance to like just blast these notes. So I'm just trying to capture something as we go. What do you think this is this land use section or is this recreation? How would you prefer to call this?
I would do recreation. And that's historically what it was. We're not reinventing the wheel here. All of this stuff is the way it used to be. And then it changed because of retirements and actually, I think, ignorance on certain people's parts that this could be done easily. And when we acquired this, we found that this hadn't, like, it was a mess. Like, there's all the regulations have to be rewritten. I can't even get into if I'll just get into one particular thing. You guys are familiar with this cold plunge pool. Well, those they're going in by the dozens across the state. Each one of those is considered a public pool. No state in this country even knows how the hell to deal with it. Because we actually are on a committee that talks to other people, other public pool professionals at the state level, which is kind of a good thing. We do communicate with each other, by the way, which is a good thing across the state. We meet once a month, or across the country rather. And I found that all of them have massive programs, even tiny states like Rhode Island and Delaware. So tiny population states, obviously you want to look at population. And yet this got dumped on us under a program that was already established. So it needs to have the attention from a specific individual that can focus on this and deal with these new issues. Like, how do you regulate this? And there's all kinds of problems in the pool sector that we just walked into, and we were just overwhelmed because they require just as much restructuring as what we're doing right now with the septics. And so it was crazy.
Yeah. Bob?
Thanks, Matt. So I'm less concerned with the process or the policy and what gets changed within DPH. What I think we need to focus on is that we realize there's a need for prioritizing the work that we're talking about on the septic side. And we need to prioritize that, but not to the detriment of the other programs that Matt's currently involved in. So if management at DPH decides that it should be 2 departments, or how they split it up, or Matt gets more staffing that he oversees, I don't think we should get into the weeds on that and how they structure it, but just that we need to prioritize the education, the training, the processing of applications that we're all talking about on the septic side, and making that process and system as efficient as possible. But again, we can't do that and say, well, we don't really give a crap about, public pools, or we don't care about, the campgrounds, because those are probably equally important, maybe more important to some people. So they just need to figure out what the system's going to be to cover all the bases that they have. We can't just say, just stop worrying about campgrounds, let them sink or swim on their own. That's not realistic. So I just don't know if we need to get into exactly how it should be structured at this point.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. Perhaps we could even just say return the historic structure of the environmental engineering program to pre-2020 levels, something to that effect. Meaning that it was historically exactly those topics that we have lined out right there. And just leave it at that. And then, like you said,
I'm okay calling it out that we want to say, we want you to remove these things from these people if we can. I'm okay calling that out because, we want to say this is a housing issue. This is an important issue that needs to have the light shined on it. And this area needs to not have any more noise, and pools and campgrounds are noise, and it's not historically their responsibility. So take that group, call it recreation, and staff it up, but don't take away from this area. John?
Yeah, so I'm kind of two minds about this. I tend to agree with Bob's statement that we don't need to get too in the weeds, although I do think some of the stuff that Matt you're referring to and having that inside knowledge of the same staff that reviews X also reviews Y, and so asking them to do 2X will take them away from Y. I think that gives us some credibility, and I think that is useful, some of that level of detail. So I would encourage us to at least make a nod to that. But the one thing that I wanted to note in terms of the funding part is, again, while we've been hashing this stuff through over the last month or so, the state went ahead and passed House Bill 8002, and the governor signed it, which places a huge emphasis on development of more housing opportunities and pledges state support for infrastructure expansion. I would think that this could be a very, very opportune time to note that in our recommendations, to basically say the state is going, all in, and they're throwing almost $500,000 every year at every cog to do more housing planning. Um, so, those funds could be, commandeered, not commandeered, but directed, supplemented, pointed to by OPM to make sure that our local health departments, that our regional health departments and DPH have the resources they need to make sure that this whole state effort, to make housing faster, be supported. So it's basically saying, all right, you passed this law, put your money where your mouth is, and let's staff this up. So I just think that's an important consideration in the light of 8002.
Yeah, it's a good point. I had a question. We've kind of kicked around, we have these two things down here below. The establishment of a new AT section at DPH. I mean, when it's a new section, it's going to need new staffing, new people. But wouldn't that, at the end of the day, become part of the environmental engineering program? But like, it has to get the proper services it requires.
Yeah, it'd be a sub-program, Matt, and it's actually in the works right now. They actually, although it's been suspended temporarily, but they did look out for what I had hoped was going to be a supervisor and two engineers, and what it turned out to be was, and this is all public information, so I'm not telling you anything that's not out there. How it's public information because these jobs were physically posted. There was what they call an interim manager position, not a supervisor. So that was a little concerning to me, because then that just meant that they were going to throw that directly under me as a supervisor rather than having a dedicated supervisor, which I think is necessary given the complexity of ATs and just how. But fundamentally, I agree, Matt. It would fit under our program, which just would be a sub program with a separate supervisor. Again, just what I'm saying, that can dedicate their bandwidth, so to speak, on this. And that's what you want. You want somebody specific that can make those decisions and not be distracted by other topics that are completely unrelated. Just to give you one quick example, just before I came on here, and Adam can attest to this, Adam gets a call from a senator about a public pool that they want approved. So and we've got a stack of them coming in, and all my staff are doing them, and they're terrible submittals. But my point is, that's a distraction. And when we get a call from a senator or from any political person, generally speaking, we kind of have to drop everything we're doing. I mean, realistically, and handle it, just because it's such high profile. And then that hurts and takes away from this kind of stuff. So there's a perfect example of just that it takes away from me and my staff from something that's not related to this stuff. But having a separate program with a separate supervisor that would deal with these high-level issues, because when the political things come in, the supervisor has to drop everything and deal with it. That would no longer be the case with these being separate.
Right. So would you put it there is my question, on the responsibilities? And then call out.
Yes, a
this
separate,
requirement.
right, a dedicated supervisor. How about dedicated program supervisor? Historically, guys, because I mean, this is the AT thing's been going on for like 15, 20 years almost. And so my predecessor wrote up a very detailed, which is, again, this is no secret, of a structure. And that's pretty much what it was historically, was it's under the AEP program, but having a separate supervisor that basically worked, arm in arm with the other conventional system supervisor. And we shared resources.
Right.
Which would be efficient. That's what we want in state government. We want efficiency. At least I definitely want efficiency.
Okay. Bob?
Thanks again, Matt. First, I just want to say, John, I think you've got a great point that we tie this back into 2002. I think that really is, going to be the driving force to either something's going to happen or not happen on all this work that we're doing as a full committee. The one thing with the AT systems, I think it needs to be a separate process because I don't think, quite honestly, there's enough staff at DPH to manage this right now. Unless there's some major changes in this whole thing, it's going to be really hard for you guys to manage this thing, Matt. I know we haven't really talked too much about this, but we've got the advisory committee now, which really doesn't have any teeth. It's sort of a public policy place where people can vent or ask questions, but they really don't have any authority to dictate what is going to go into the code or changes to the code. And we've talked a little bit about the Codes and Standards Committee that the state building code works under. And I'm not trying to take responsibility or authority away from DPH to make sure that we're doing things properly. But is there a way that we could create a group that has some authority to make, I don't even want to say recommendations, almost make, I don't know if it would be required changes to the health code, but it would be a thoughtful process with the proper qualified people involved to evaluate systems and bring them in, and maybe even just where if DPH has ideas about wanting to change something in the current codes or process, that it goes before this committee and they'd make a decision, yes, that's a valid point, we should be making a change or not. And it sort of takes the burden off of you, Matt, and your department of having to recommend and install every new revision. Where with codes and standards, like this chief building official, he just is really an enforcement mechanism of what happens out of codes and standards. They make
Can
the
you go through
decision.
that, Bob? Could you explain that? Like how does that so basically they're setting the policy, sort of, so to speak, this committee? Or
Yeah, so they have the existing building code, and so any recommendations, well, on a national level first, the code is being reviewed on a national level for changes, and then it comes to the state, and they get to either implement it in its entirety with no changes, but typically they make recommendations that, for whatever reason, makes sense here in Connecticut, but doesn't make sense across the whole country. So they'll come up with programs to modify it. One might be that there's one that's always out there, it's been there for 100 years, is our stair geometry is a little different here because we have a lot of two-story homes. And so the rise and run of stairs, I don't want to get too technical, are allowed to be a little bit different than what's required elsewhere in the country. And if you're building 90% of your homes or ranches in Florida, you don't really care about stair geometry, but here in Connecticut, it matters to us. And it affects the way you design your homes. So the Codes and Standards Committee gets to look at the code and say, we like the code generally, but we're going to make these changes and these are our recommendations. And they're staffed by engineers, fire professionals, um, builders,
well,
there's
you just
guys
said
in the
that
licensed trades. So they're
who
all
decides,
qualified
Bob?
with, I'm sorry?
Decides at the end though, because you said, okay, so it sounds very similar to the code advisory that we have this committee that makes recommendations, but who ultimately makes the decision to implement those
So,
recommendations?
so the Codes and Standard Committee ultimately says this is going to be our code.
Okay.
And it has to be approved through regs review and stuff. There's a couple of other steps after it comes out of codes. But the head building official, while he's
Yeah.
instrumental in it, I don't think that he or she, in this case right now it's a she, actually has any say in what ultimately happens.
Okay.
So it would really just be giving the advisory committee that you currently have structured, in my mind, just a little more teeth to say this is how it's going to go. But again, you delegate, especially with the AT stuff. So somebody that wants to bring an AT system in would come to them and they would review it and determine, what's the background, how long has it been in place in other places, is it handling nitrogen properly, is it doing all the other things it's proposed to do? And then they bring it to you and say, Matt, we're going to suggest that we allow this particular system to be used here in the state. And then you go, fine, what are the rules that I've got to enforce upon it?
Mhm.
The installation, the testing, the treatment, whatever it is. But you guys don't have to yourself go out and decide if that system or that process is appropriate or not. That's kind of what I'm thinking. And we could get somebody from Codes and Standards to talk more in detail about what they do and how that process kind of works. I mean, I'm not involved on a day-to-day basis on it, but that's how I generally understand it functions.
Yeah. Adam, your hands up.
Yeah, a couple things. One, piggybacking off of what Bob said, I'm not an expert in how the building code works, but I do think that they only update every so often.
Three
Is it
years.
3 years? And then they have to go before the regs review committee um, each time, which then has their say in the entire process. Uh, Matt, correct me if I'm wrong, with the code advisory committee, the technical standards, we can update more frequently than that, and we don't have the extra step in the process of going through regs review, which could lead to further changes in the code that
Correct.
hasn't necessarily gone through that advisory committee. So it's a much more nimble process that we have with the technical standards right now than with the building code.
You like
So
nimble, like when you're on the builder side of it, we flinch because the nice thing about the builder code is it's only every 3 years, but we're actually trying to get it to be pushed out to every 6 years. Because when you do something like get a development approved, it takes me 2 years to get a development approved. If those 2 years happen to fall in the middle of you changing the policy and that has a huge effect on what I can't do, or what it costs me to do what I'm planning to do, like that could totally change the direction of a project that we've been working on for 2 years to get approved. And that's the reason the building code is only every 3 years. And most states, even California, has now pushed it to every 6 years. So that's one of the things that, from my personal agenda, I'd really like to see us accomplish with the building codes committee is getting it to be every 6 years.
So with the building code, would they have to, is there a lot of technology and stuff that needs to be, adopted and looked at? I know like AT, there's new technologies in the pipeline that may need review more frequently if we want it on there. Because if it's not approved, then under that situation, we're waiting 3 to 6 years before that can be up and running.
There is a certain amount of technology that we have to always be looking at. A lot of it surrounds electrical and energy efficiency. A lot of it surrounds safety and property protection and sustainability of property. But yeah, there are some technical things that fall under that code, as well as special interests that people just end up pushing into the code.
Mhm.
Adam?
Yeah, and
Matt.
then the other thing I wanted to get in there, there's other stuff on this agenda, and I wonder, and it seems like we've gone back and forth a little bit on exactly where you guys want to place everything. I wonder if maybe a broader recommendation of, section focused on septic with additional staffing, maybe the way to go, instead of exactly where we place everything now, because as you heard a little bit here. There's a lot of ideas on where stuff might be placed. There's a long institutional history of why it got there, right or wrong. And having the exact answer now about where everything should be and the exact role everyone should be in might be tough to do in the time frame that we have this committee to work out.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. I think what we do is we take this, I'm just trying to capture the conversation as we go. But I think we take this out of this meeting and we spend a little time beating it up individually, and then we bring it back to next week's meeting. And we say, okay, now we've had a week to digest on these issues. Let's beat it up. And I have a couple notes in here, Matt, expand upon, what this means. The engineer trained in this area of responsibility. Who are those people and how much time is it going to get? Who do they come from? So I think we take this, we expound upon it, and we say, you know what? Maybe this isn't the right direction. But I think if we have to start from somewhere and then beat it up ourselves before we present it to anybody else. Like, I wouldn't say present this tomorrow at that meeting. I would say talk about the fact that we're doing this tomorrow at the meeting. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think that's the right timeline and sort of level of detail. Yeah, and I think Matt and Adam, I think we do want to sort of thread that needle about, again, make sort of broad recommendations about additional funding in these categories, and then pepper in just enough detail, I think, to, as I said previously, to kind of give us that credibility to sort of express to the department and the legislators that we understand, pulling this thread over here could mean fewer staff hours on this other issue. And so just showing that we are aware of it and have considered it. But yeah, I think, that's leads us to underscore the main takeaway, which is we need more staff in this area, to provide the additional services that we're requesting. So yeah, I'm with you on this one, Matt.
Yeah. Matt, go ahead.
Yeah, so basically, I guess in a nutshell, you could say, maybe say some structural changes that will enable the EEP program to focus on, subsurface sewage matters, and then something to the effect of shall also include additional staff, something. So, because I agree with Adam too, getting too much in the weeds here. That gets a little scary, although I want to get the point across that the program needs to be able to specialize in order to be effective. Real quick, though, I just want to circle back, and I'll take my hand down. Just careful what you wish for, guys, about because I think Adam touched upon the benefits of our current structure of having this ability to make these changes very rapidly. I see what Matt says too. It's like, well, geez, we don't want to do it. But most of I can't think, and I've been doing this for a long time. I've been on this committee. It's pretty rare that, yes, it's not a voting body, but it's rare that we've ever had members, have vehemently disagree with any of the changes that we do. I can't think of a time that's happened. Perhaps maybe there are changes that were asked that maybe were not implemented. That may have happened every now and again, but the opposite, it's rare. So yes, we're not a voting body, but we do take seriously into consideration what our members are telling us, and to that effect. So I just want to throw that out there. Although I will say, Bob, though, that stuff that you're saying appeals to me just from a personal standpoint, not having to make those decisions. I kind of like that. But on the other hand, we got to be careful. I think we should be careful here what we let the legislators know. This thing with the technical standards, that we have this sort of a power. On one hand, it seems scary, but on the other hand, it's done a lot of good. It's enabled us to be fluid enough to make changes to be more efficient as a program. That's very unique, I think, for a government type of thing. I don't think very few other states have that flexibility that we have.
Go ahead, Bob, then I want to kind of redirect a little bit, but go ahead.
Yeah, I agree where you say, having the flexibility, like bringing in an AT system that we find is working very well in other parts of the country, and we'd hate to have to wait 3 years before we can be smart enough to utilize it here in Connecticut. So I agree, you want to have some sort of flexibility, but I also like the fact that there's another group, what are they saying about Trump? Nobody can be king. I don't want you to be king, Matt.
No, I like that.
And it's not you personally,
No, I got you.
because it's the next person that maybe has a different agenda. I mean, quite honestly, we
Yeah.
probably wouldn't be here if you guys weren't proposing the nitrogen stuff. And that's where we, the Home Builder Association, have really been pushing back hard on that because of the cost implications and
Right.
whether or not that's the most effective way to address the nitrogen issues in Long Island Sound, or
Yeah.
should we be going after treatment plants? And that's where I think the Codes and Standards type committee could be beneficial in kind of fleshing out the various options and whether we're going in the right direction. And I'm not being critical of you or the
Oh,
DPH as a whole.
no problem.
But that's just, kind of what I'm thinking in my head is it's a little different process. Having worked with you over the last several months, I have a much better understanding, quite honestly, than I did for the last 2 or 3 years, sitting in on a lot of those advisory committees or council meetings and not really understanding what my purpose was there, but I didn't really feel like I had much impact. And maybe I was having more impact than I knew because I was getting information that my concerns to you and they were
Sure.
being considered, but it just didn't feel that way at the time.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you what, I think probably the most effective would be to just maybe ask for some restructuring of that current process. I think that's a startup, which I would not have objections to. As a matter of fact, I think some of the stuff that you're saying appeals to me in that we would get more feedback. So I'm not having to make those decisions in an echo chamber, so to speak. Like you guys are providing me direct information. And a matter of fact, we want that. I could tell you some horror stories. I'll give you one real quick. When we put in this so-called what they call kid catchers in our risers in our septic tanks, that there's these nettings that we put in, and we tried to vet that with our licensed installers. And they weren't that active in the committee. They probably weren't paying attention. And then when we implemented, there were things that were a problem with what we implemented, and we had to do some tweaks. But I was like telling these guys, this is something you should have said while we were in the committee, because you guys are the experts. You guys are the boots on the ground that know what these things look like in the field. You should have said something then. But so I guess my point with that is, yes, we welcome more feedback. I think we need to have members more active in this committee, and perhaps we could make it more sort of structured better to foment that type of activity.
What's the formal name of that committee?
It's the Code Advisory Committee.
And the Code Advisory Committee handles more than just the technical standards too, right? It does.
Yep.
It has some other stuff under. You guys look at some other stuff too, right? Or am I thinking of something else?
Well, it's obviously just when you say this other stuff, it's the septic code essentially.
It's just the septic.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. There's nothing. I mean, the only other thing I will say is with the water treatment, wastewater is under that. But
Right, that's what I was thinking of.
Yeah, that's definitely in it. But no human remains, obviously no pools, none of that stuff. But the wastewater is in there.
Okay. So we can build upon that.
Yep.
One of the things that Jim had listed here, I just wanted to touch on. He had a pretty bold idea that we hadn't really talked about too much in the past. Possibility of local health departments and districts reviewing, approving, and inspections of SSDS up to 5,000 gallons per day.
Who wrote that? Was that Jim?
That was Jim's suggestion.
What do you mean by that, Jim? I'm just trying to understand that.
Well, I'm just picking back off of what Bob stated a while back, maybe to try to minimize the workload off of DPH.
Okay.
So again, if a 5,000 gallon system came before us, local health department, we still got to review it, and we're still
Right.
going to do inspections. The only thing that we're not doing is approving it. So I just threw that out there. That, you know, even though that would put a burden on us, I was just looking at trying to minimize the burden on up at the state level. Just piggyback off what Bob said a while ago. That's why I put the word possibility. Do I want it there? Not really, but it was just something to lessen the burden from the state level. So it was just an idea.
Well, just one quick thing. Can I expand on that? Not all the sanitarians are aware of this, but so the code currently says right now, if there's a system over 2,000 gallons per day, that has to be reviewed by the state health department. A lot of sanitarians and even engineers and developers don't realize, though, that's a system. In other words, you could have a property, which I have right now. I have a condo, I'm reviewing it, with individual condo buildings, each with 2 bedrooms with their own systems. Not a single system. They're all 2-bedroom systems. Yes, collectively, that property is like 7,500 gallons per day. Now, they still sent it to me. They don't have to. I'm not required. When I say I mean the state of Connecticut or DPH is not required to review that. It's in the language, in the regulations now and moving forward. It's still going to be there. It says a system. So that, potentially they don't have to send. A lot of times they do, just because they're controversial and everything else. But I just want to throw that out there. There's not a requirement unless there's at least one system that's 2,000 gallons per day or greater. If there isn't, they don't have to come to us.
Can I ask a follow-up with that one, Matt?
Yeah.
Which is, so even if it's a condo and they're all of the individual septic tanks and systems are on the same parcel, technically, that doesn't trip it into yours?
Correct.
So it's individual septic systems, even on a same parcel,
Yeah,
could be under 2,000 gallons each and get dealt with exclusively locally.
that is correct. But what's interesting, though, is that from a jurisdictional standpoint, between DPH and DEEP, it is assessed at the property. So clearly, if that property exceeded, like the one I have right now is 7,500, if it was 10,000 gallons per day, even though there were individual systems, it would go to DEEP.
It would go to DEP. So
Okay.
I mean,
Why
maybe we
distinction?
just need a little bit of clarification on that, because I think, as a municipal staffer working through that process, there is sometimes some confusion about jurisdiction, and specifically these, condos or apartments that are dealing with, like bungalow duplexes as part of a condo. That it's sometimes not clear who it goes to, and multiple entities might say, "Oh no, it's ours."
Right.
And that a little bringing some clarity to that. But I guess Matt, So I would just like in as a knee jerk, as a local, staff, I tend to like the idea of giving some flexibility to the local health department or the health district to review this stuff. What would be the objection at the state, and not your objection precisely, but like what's the negative of Jim's suggestion here?
No, I don't have, and there's certainly not at all. If anything, it would be less of a workload to us. The only thing I will say is, why, you might ask, well, why did the locals send it? Like, why did this town send it? It boils down to, sometimes these things are crazy controversial, and there's a lot of politics in town, and it's very uncomfortable for the health department. I think we've been through this, or at least maybe in one of my other committees, for the health department, because they're getting pressure from their political leadership to move things through that maybe they don't feel comfortable with. So sometimes by having us involved, they can kind of say, well, it's the state that tells us to do it, and that kind of thing. So that does happen fairly often. That would be some of the reasons why they would send something to us when it doesn't necessarily have to. Do we like that? Not particularly, but you know what? We have a great relationship with our local partners, and we like to help them out whenever we can. And But Jim's suggestion, basically what he's saying here is instead of being 2,000 gallons per day going to DPH, it's 5,000 gallons per day going to DPH. I mean, I don't have an objection. That means less work for me. Some of the health departments might, but I don't.
Bob?
Yeah, I raised this question several meetings ago, and I guess my thought process was really to take that workload off of DPH, as long as the locals have the qualifications to make the decisions. And you tell me if they do or not. There may be some locals that are fine with that, and other ones that are barely able to handle a 3-bedroom single family house and shouldn't be looking at anything beyond that. I don't know. Uh,
Mhm.
but that was the
No,
thought process, was just trying to simplify the process. And if that what's the magic of 2,000 gallons versus 5,000? I don't know if
nothing.
that's the right number, if it's 3,500 or 4,000 gallons. I mean, it can be any number you want.
You're right. It was
But I
random.
was just trying to figure out a way of, why do we have this two-step process? Unless it's just a checks and balance to make sure that they didn't miss something that you guys might pick up on, or you look at it differently than a local does.
Well, I
Um,
think, yeah, I think what it is a lot of things with this business with us is you lose if you don't use it, you lose it. So in other words, some of this stuff is quite complex to review. So the locals primarily they're reviewing small systems like residential homes and things like that. So they don't get a lot of these, which often are commercial too. So there's different design elements to it. And yes, they do have the training to do it. I think a lot of them though become rusty because they're not doing it all the time, and that probably comes into play here too. That there may be mistakes that are made because they don't do it all the time. But then if it's sent up to us because that's all we're doing, we obviously stay fresh with it, and so it is like a second set of eyes. So, and to be realistic with you guys, our review times are nothing. I mean, compared to most people think, oh, it's got to go to the state. Certainly for our office, it's out in a couple of weeks, as long as it's or even less than that, as long as it's complete and everything's there.
Matt, is there a big difference between a residential system and some commercial systems? I know, like with restaurants, you got, oil traps and stuff like that. Is it
No,
overly complicated when you get into commercial? Like, I'm wondering, do we carve out just residential for certain gallons? Because that's pretty simple
you're
calculations.
right.
Number of bedrooms, so many gallons, X number of square feet, leach area. I mean,
Yeah,
it's kind of
good point.
straightforward.
Actually, that's an interesting perspective. I agree with that. So to answer your question specifically, is yeah, it is different when it's a commercial because it's a lot harder to determine design flows because you got businesses you got to kind of go through. We have a chart that gives you so there's some ambiguity there. Whereas, like you said, though, with these residential dwelling units, it is what it is. There's no variation whether it's 5,000 or 2,000 gallons. So that is perhaps a perspective you could look at that. You could limit it to residential ones, which the design is identical then.
So we could do
Whereas,
residential up to 5,000 gallons, but anything over 2,000 gallons on a commercial basis would still
yeah,
come to you guys for review. I mean, I'm just throwing it
yeah.
out there. It's
No,
an
this is
idea. I don't
good.
know if
This is
this
good
makes sense.
brainstorming. I like it. I mean, it's just an idea.
But there's
Like,
nothing in the health code itself or your technical standards that differentiate other than the calculations that you use to get to the system
yes,
design.
correct, correct. Yeah. And I think what we want to be clearer here is uh, individual system. Okay, so it's not the collective design flow. I know to articulate that in a simple manner is not going to be that easy, but I think serving a system, an individual system. There you go. All right, so you did it fairly well.
Yeah, or a collective system under a certain size if you wanted to use a collective. If you I think the other committees are already having this discussion about whether or not it should be per property or per, there's a size, because as Dave Potts always says, the effluent does not know property lines. They don't know that it crossed the line of a property. It's just what the
True.
flow is. Um, so, we can talk about whether it should be a single individual system, but as an individual system, as long as it's getting the gallons, it doesn't matter if that individual system is servicing a single family house or a 10-unit apartment building, if the design flows are under that limit.
Correct, and it's the same method. And you might want to put individual systems serving residential dwellings or dwelling units. So we're limiting it to just residential dwelling units, recognizing that the design parameters are identical regardless of the flow. That's
And-
essentially what we're saying here.
I was just going to ask Jim. I'm glad your hands up. I was just going to ask you. I want to hear the local sanitarian side of this thing. Are we putting a whole bunch of burden on you that you guys don't want to touch, or you don't think that some of your brethren are comfortable dealing with or qualified to deal with? Maybe you have a say on that.
Just want to get a little clarification from Matt. When you mean residential dwelling units, are you also talking about multifamilies?
Yes, I mean, residential would include, residential dwelling units would be single family or multifamily.
All right, because then we could be getting into apartment complexes.
Oh, no, that's exactly what we're looking at here. I think that's what our point is.
Right.
That apartment complexes that have, let's say, well, actually, it's going to be interesting, guys, because community systems are going to come into play, which has to come to us. But if you had a single apartment building that had 5,000 gallons, and then you had a second one with 2,000 gallons, with this review, with this particular process here, we wouldn't have to come to DPH in that case, right? Because it's not more than 5.
But if we had two 5,000 gallon buildings on one property, that's going to deep.
Deep.
Right. Yes.
Go
Yeah.
back to John's scenario. You know, you got to be careful, John. And design flows are based on the property. Now you can have individual buildings, let's say less than 2,000 gallons, but when the total of those individual buildings on one parcel is more than 7,500, then it has to go to deep. To me, you know, commercial properties, residential properties, septic systems, there's not much difference other than you got to look at a different table, either tables 7 or 8, in order to come up with the square footage based on the design flow and perk rate. And it's not that difficult in order to determine the gallons per day, because the technical standards has a requirement where you can use water meter readings from a similar building for a year. So to me, I don't see a difference between, you have to separate commercial out and residential. If we're going to make a recommendation that my fellow sanitarians and director of health are going to hate me for, if we push it up to 5,000 gallons, it should be across the board and not have this, pie cutting scenario.
So you would not want to differentiate out commercial.
It just, I'm a KISS theory guy. Keep it simple.
I'm not going to object. It's less work for my program, so I can't object to that.
And again, not to bring it back to 8,002, but that might be good, because one of the provisions of 8,002, I believe, is to allow, as of right, some middle housing, which is 2 to 9 units in commercial zones, which is to say as adaptive reuse, new construction, or some mixed use. So I suspect there's going to be a pretty significant uptick in the possibility of mixed use developments, where you've got some retail and some residential happening in the same parcel. So yeah, keeping it simple one way or another would be, I think, probably a good idea.
You know, the only other issue pushing it up to 5,000 gallons, that's going to be that's a public health code scenario. So that has to go through all the legislated,
Back to that.
stuff. That's not in the technical standards. That's in the Connecticut Public Health Code, section 1913B 103.
All right.
So then that's
It
something
is-
I was just going to say that's something we should broach with the regulation subcommittee when we meet with, is that tomorrow? Or
Yeah,
our next joint?
tomorrow at 2:00.
Yeah.
So we have not reviewed this funding idea, so I'm just gonna make this blue in color. We've reviewed these out. What I'm gonna do is right after this meeting, I'm gonna have this sent out to all you guys so you all have it and you can kind of all beat it up and think about it and churn over it, add notes so we can collaborate on all of our notes and create a more comprehensive document. I think this is a good start. Before we go though, I'd also say that we still have to address our speed of review issues and that moonlighting provision that we kicked around last week. And those things need to go in, as well as maybe some fees that support that. And I still think it's not a bad idea to make the ask that the fees should be commensurate to the work, and they should fund the work that's being done. But we'll come back to that at our next meeting. So if there's nothing else, are we good for today?
Yeah.
Trying to be mindful of
It's good.
everybody's time.
Good progress.
Great
Thank you, Matt.
conversation. Very good conversation today. Thanks, guys.
Great job, guys.